I'm Robbie Knock. I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship and Professional Practice. And it's a pleasure to have you here joining us for Creative Tech Week for our panel on the impact of emergent tech in creative education. And Jenny Rodenhouse, our Director of the Immersion Lab and Professor in MDP and Interaction Design, amongst other departments, is here to lead the panel. Jenny, with that, I'll hand it off to you, and thank you for hosting.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for coming to the panel discussion. And thank you so much for our panel participants for joining us, who I'll be introducing. And so, yeah, as Robbie mentioned, I direct the Immersion Lab, and I'm really excited to have this discussion around the impact of emerging tech and how it impacts creative learning. And that's something we really think about a lot in the Immersion Lab, which is a curriculum dedicated to technology-centered research. And I'm moderating the panel, and we're joined today by Guidione, Todd, and Ian. And we'll start with introductions for the first about 15 minutes, and then we'll move into a conversation with for the rest of the time. So I'd first like to welcome Guidione Machava, entrepreneur, designer, author, and founder of World Class Designer Conference. Guidione created the conference as a way to gather the best designers in the world for 24 hours with a shared goal of changing the future of design in Africa. So thank you, Guidione, for joining us today. Next, I'd like, oh, thanks. And Todd, I'd like to welcome Todd Masilko, who's Associate Professor and Faculty Director of Interaction Design at ArtCenter. Todd has a long history of working in product and interaction design, specifically in R&D. And we teach classes together in the Immersion Lab, and Todd also teaches a lot of sponsored studios that engage industry and students in thinking about how emerging technology impacts people's lives. So wanted to welcome Todd to the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Great to be here.
And I'll turn it over to you, Todd, to share a few examples of some of the work you do at ArtCenter.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll try to make this quick because we want to get to the discussion. I have a little bit of feedback on my end. Are you hearing an echo, Jenny, or is that just me?
I'm not hearing an echo.
Okay.
I am as well, but
you are, yeah. All right. Sorry about that. I don't. I'm gonna just keep going. Given the topic, so I'm going to be the guy with too many slides at the beginning. I'll try to go quick. But given the topic, emergent tech and education. And given that Jenny, our esteemed moderator, and I teach a class together in interaction called AI and Agents, which focuses on getting our students making stuff with emergent tech in order to start to get comfortable with pulling insight from getting your hands on the tech. I wanted to just go quickly, as quickly as I can, through a handful of project examples from students in the last few terms here at ArtCenter. So I'll move quick, but I think it's great to give context maybe to our discussion relative to what's going on right now here at ArtCenter. So the first project I'd like to show is called the Artificial Intelligence Broadcast System, which was a concept developed by interaction student Marianne Wellman after spending about a month experimenting with a platform called Runway ML and machine learning models that were able to, you could, for example, scan images of people that you know or characters from TV shows or run videos through it, and it could extract text data from that, including names and objects and scenes. And let's go ahead and click the next slide, and I'll talk over it and talk a little bit about the process. So this is kind of what I'm talking about here, running clips of TV shows through a machine learning model in Runway ML. And the model could be trained to recognize people, to recognize coffee cups or domestic house or, forested woodland, stuff like that. And then Marianne was taking all of those keywords and running them through another model that could generate stories and dialogue.
I love George because he's funny.
And then you could take that and run it through another model that would do text to voice, and you could assign different voice attributes. And it was really a super fun, 4 or 5 weeks of just open-ended experimentation with a bunch of machine learning models and things like generative text, text to voice. So then what we do in the class is we ask the students to pull insight from the research and formulate a project proposal. And I'm not going to play the whole thing, just like 10 seconds of it on the next slide, if we jump to that.
This is AIBS, the Artificial Intelligence Broadcast System. Here you can watch, create, and remix mini episodes we call spins. Let's take a look at this Sign Friends example.
Okay, so I'm not going to play the Sign Friends example. If you go to gradshow.artcenter.edu, you can watch the whole video. It's wild. It's Seinfeld and Friends characters mashed together with AI-generated dialogue and computer-generated voiceover. And it's wild, and it's a lot of fun. And the point of it is, it's an idea that couldn't have come into being without hands-on experimentation with emerging tech. So let's go to the next one. This is a really fun class, by the way. This is another one out of the same class called Jeepney ML, developed by an IXD recent grad, Georgia Siapno. And Georgia, really brilliant technologist, had interned at a startup in the autonomous vehicle space, had done a sponsored project with Waymo, was very familiar with the way software and algorithms used to train, for example, self-driving vehicles are trained with image and video data, and also did a bunch of experiments because Georgia was concerned, for example, about things like algorithmic bias or what types of imagery are models not trained on, and ran a bunch of images from her family's native country of the Philippines through image recognition models like the Runway ML I just mentioned, and noticed that culturally specific imagery isn't very well contextualized or recognized by typically trained image recognition models. So this image you see here, which is a 3D model Jeepney, it's sort of a unique form of public transportation to the Philippines. It was one of those things that the image, the kind of model that would train a self-driving car, for example, just didn't know how to handle. So on the next slide, Georgia formulated from her research insights a really fascinating project with an interface built in Unity. And I don't have a video for this one handy, but it's a build your own Jeepney, like build your own digital artifact. You get to keep it, little 3D model of a Jeepney. You can build it using a whole bunch of textures and images that she pulled from photographs taken from photo data sets from the Philippines. But the cool thing about it was, not only do you get a free build your own 3D Jeepney, but the model is then used to spin around and take little screen captures of and take images to train, theoretically that is, a machine learning model. So it's basically generating the kind of data that we might be training CAPTCHA or something like that with, but it's with like user generated models of stuff. Really fun project. And I really loved being a part of the class and seeing that one unfold. One last one, and then we'll keep going. Two students, Rodney Edwards and Siladitya Sharma, and I remember they were playing around with another set of machine learning models that could do things like, there's one called Stylegan, and you can, for example, feed it images of sneakers, Nike shoes over the years, and it'll generate its own algorithmically generated sneaker rendering. They all look a little computery, but they're interesting. And Rodney and Siladitya, I remember they both said, hey, we love storyboarding, but we're not good at drawing. Would it be possible to have a machine learning powered storyboarding tool? Could it work? And they did a bunch of tests. They were kind of weird looking storyboard sketches, but they proved the point and then formulated that insight into a project proposal called Arter. And we can click the video and take a look at that. So this is fun. They built a mock simulation interface that would allow designers to type text, a person working in a cafe with a laptop, and tag it with attributes. And then again, in theory, because this is the simulation, generate storyboard frames based on text tags and a data set of sketches that you've trained the algorithm on. really fun proposal. So anyway, I just wanted to go through those quickly before we start the panel discussion as a, just as a little bit of framing for a bit of what's going on here at ArtCenter in the Immersion Lab and in some of the more experimental aspects of the curriculum, because I think we're having fun getting our hands on Emergent Tech, and it is beginning to influence the way that we conceptualize and create design work. So anyway, looking forward to talking further soon.
Thanks, Todd. And then finally, I'd like to introduce Ian Sands. He's the founder and managing partner at Pilot Lab, a technology concept lab in Seattle and London. And Ian has a long history in developing concepts and solutions that intersect both business challenges and emerging technologies, and also founded Microsoft's envisioning group that really looked about 10 years out. And so helped create that vision and strategy for a large company like Microsoft. Thank you, Ian, for joining us on the panel today.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having us. It was great to hear all that has evolved in what Todd was sharing there. And so I'm going to share a little video here that shows a smattering of some of our projects. But maybe before we roll that, I'll just sort of mention that yeah, primarily my focus and career has centered around that intersection between technology and design and achieving, most importantly, solutions to hard business problems, using both tech and design as the tools to help solve those challenges. And that kind of goes back to my final terms at ArtCenter and what I studied at the time there, lacking some of these cool new classes and curriculum options that you guys have today, was sort of a self-driven self-study with folks like Linda Weinman and others that were sort of seeing similar visions at the time. And so we sort of pulled together a curriculum that allowed for some of that investigation. So great to hear that is a much more formal thing. And I've kept in touch with Maggie Hendricks and others along the way, and Karen and all the great leaders and faculty to sort of see how things are evolving. So excited to share a little bit about what we do. This quick reel I'm going to show is a montage of different projects, from visioning work to brand work to prototyping and tech exploration. So we can let that go, and then I'll talk a little bit about who we've worked with and the process that we use. Cool. So, and turn my own video off for a second. Hopefully my audio is still clear and functioning. So Yeah, lots of different opportunities to explore throughout my career. This intersection between technology, business challenges, and design, and certainly working with a range of thought leaders around the world has sort of confirmed at least one most important theme, which I think continues to ring true through the projects I've worked on, and all sort of was reinforced by what we learned as ArtCenter students, at least for me many years ago, and that is that first and foremost, we are problem solvers, and we need to and must remain very curious and full of questions all the way along. And so the variety of companies that I've had the great fortune to work with, and the great leaders, including special projects with Bill Gates and others, have been made possible by an acknowledgement that that there's a lot to learn always. That most every project we go into, we are not the experts in any one domain, whether it be hospitality or deep machine learning or healthcare, or other sectors that we've worked with. And really, we have no expertise in those, and those lack of information at the outset to be noted as an expert has allowed us to be curious and ask lots of questions. So that's something that I think is critical to, especially when it comes to technology and understanding how to use it, is to be aware of what you don't know and how you can develop processes that allow for that. So if we go to the next slide, the most important sort of component, I think, is to be rigorous about your process, right? Follow a good process and force yourself to move through those stages of starting with gaining and understanding, gaining knowledge, listening to others, asking stupid questions is critical to having good ideas and solving problems well. And so we're really rigorous about that, no matter what the scale or duration of the project is. We ensure that there is some amount of time, even if it's only a week. A lot of good unknowns can be uncovered in a short amount of time. And then the other, and to many degrees, this is design thinking. This is a design process. But the other sort of element that we're rigorous about is that envision, to think big, to think long term, even if that's not a part of your particular project. I think that all solutions are better when you've thought about version next and next as you're solving for the immediate problem that you're tasked with. So with all of our work, we try to stretch our imagination, stretch our ideation and our concept generation to include some what ifs and some why nots, and some possibilities that we can remove from the table because they're quote unquote not in scope for a certain task, but they are in alignment with the end goals, and shed a little bit of light on where things might go, because that always helps us ratchet back and think about, well, okay, if that technology isn't appropriate for this solution for this particular problem today, at some point it will be, and how do we build a solution today that can stair step towards that? So that that's a real critical. Familiar for hopefully everyone. I know that ArtCenter is great at helping designers be thinkers and problem solvers, and use good process to get there. So looking forward to chatting.
Thank you so much, Ian. So now we're going to move into discussion and create a conversation between Guidione, Todd, and Ian. But together, we're really interested in talking about these three main points, a bit of how are we actually defining emergent technology. I think that each everyone on the panel would probably have a different approach or different lens on this. We're also wanting to discuss how do we create with technology and explore it as a medium? And then how do we, just in a practical standpoint, how do you start to integrate it into your own workflow as an artist or designer? I'm going to stop sharing screen and open up with an initial question. I think when I first talked to each of the panelists individually, I think I was really surprised at all the different answers to this question. And I think it's also really important that we talk about it, because I think there's a lot of tropes or things that we think we know what emerging tech means or what technologies might fall within that bucket. And so I'd like to start with what is emerging tech and how do each of you sort of view that term?
I think I can kick off. So like emerging tech, it's a very contestable, like as I remember where we had a really insightful conversation about this, Jenny. I live between two worlds, like being able to travel to US and Europe and living in Africa gives you a completely different perspective on what is emerging tech. Like your presentation, Todd, and Ian, like were completely mind blowing. It's really impressive what people are doing that side. Like we can in a way define that is as emerging technology. But like when we come back to Africa, like the definition of emerging technology kind of changed. So like I was in Paris recently, and I had to do my COVID test. So basically, you use an app to book your appointment. So in Mozambique, it's almost unimaginable to book an appointment using an app to go to the hospital. Like it's like a simple technology, I think we in this panel and people, probably most of the people are watching or listening this will consider like an app as a commodity. But for us in Mozambique and most countries in Africa, it's an emerging technology. Like it's a very innovative thing. If a hospital or a clinic decide to adopt like an app to present a service, that hospital will be seen as innovative and using emerging technology. So as I said in our conversation, like emerging technology has a completely different meaning based on the context. Like for Africa, most of the things that like the rest of the world take for granted or take as a basic necessity, for us, we still define that as emerging technology.
Ian or Todd?
Sure. Yeah. No, I love that, Gideon. I think that's critical consideration always is context, and that is essential to ground yourself by that context, whether it be geographic, socioeconomic, cultural. Emerging tech has so many different definitions, and to me, oftentimes it isn't and shouldn't be solely even technology itself and the use of technology as we describe it. By definition, technology is really sort of innovation tools, right? And there's so many different tool types and so many different forms of innovation that should be considered, and some of them in many of our sort of vernaculars would be considered low tech. Like, well, look at how this problem is being solved. It's using almost no technology to solve it, but there is innovation. There's innovation perhaps in behavior or in communication. I mean, you think of how humans have adapted amazingly over our lifetime. It's always been, yes, our use of technology, but most importantly, our use of communication that has sort of allowed us to evolve in the ways that we have. And so I like to force that sort of appropriateness first and talk about tech as just another tool. We are need to be focused on looking at all the possible tools, whether it's new materials, new forms of communication, new behaviors that are emerging. And so innovation and technology to me feel like they need to be critically understood in the context of the problem, and then force us to think outside of a certain channel, look at adjacent technologies or adjacent industries, whether it be solving problems for perhaps hospitality or travel, but looking at healthcare for inspiration, solving problems for first world banking, but looking at what's happening in emerging markets and their use of mobile text technology to solve very common problems in very different ways with different tools. All of those things provide great inspiration, and really that's where tech should always lie, as a possible tool that inspires us to think of more creative ways to solve problems.
Yeah, these are all great points, and I totally agree with all of it, that it's not the tech itself that necessarily is the only thing that makes it emergent. It's also how and where and why it's being used. And it was making me think, as you were both talking about, like high flex teaching at ArtCenter right now, we're playing around with a particular, it's not really new tech, any of it really, Zoom and cameras and microphones in our classrooms, and a mixture of students and instructors that are in the room and remote. And none of the actual software tools are things that we're unfamiliar with, but the context is. And we're in the middle of the process of figuring out how the pieces really want to be put together in a way that's going to get the job done for everyone. So I feel like part of what makes something emergent tech is that in that context, whatever the context is, we're collectively figuring out how it works best or how to make it work for us. Like there's a lot of figuring out. We haven't landed on a consensus, I guess. So I even think of, like I said, like our high flex teaching right now here at ArtCenter in its own way feels like there's an emergent tech component to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this point that everyone's bringing up is emergent tech. It's sort of, who is it new to, and in what context, and that we can't kind of assume that everyone has that shared point of view or shared vision. And I think based on that, I was kind of wondering about how has emergent tech, as we define or how you define it for yourself, changed how you understand the world? I think that brings up a lot of kind of some of the aspects you brought up around researching or trying to understand it because it comes out. And so just by learning about it, right, it inevitably changes how you're thinking about a project or thinking about a problem. So I was wondering if anybody could talk about that a little bit, if there's any project in particular, or just how you utilize technology to research or understand the problem. I'll jump in and say, one thought or something I've been approaching as thinking about how to use computer vision as a way to observe the world differently, that it has this opportunity to kind of, again, where we start with research is very much in this observation and reflection. And so I do really think the wide range of technology inevitably it forms a lens on how we can see or how we could change how we see.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can try to start with this one a little bit. I know that here in the department, and Jenny and I talk about this all the time, but we talk about like the tech, and it's not the tech necessarily like machine learning, although that's an example of it, but the tech and the tools, they're materials, just like plastic or wood. If you're making a chair, like they're the medium that we work with, and they're the medium relative to the problem we're trying to solve or the design that we're trying to do, right? And so I don't know if this is going to exactly answer the question, but I feel it's extremely important in design education that we are able to make stuff, actually make at some level, make things and experience them using the material or the medium that whatever it is that we're designing is going to be made out of. So whether that's text messaging for banking, that would be a great example, or whether it's experimenting with a machine learning image recognition. Like, we can't just read about that. Like, we have to make with it. Otherwise, I think our design practice suffers. I mean, I know it does. And so I guess that's not really an answer to the question so much as a philosophy that we're trying to make. And we have to be really scrappy about, on a case-by-case basis, how do we actually do that? Because I don't think there's a standard answer. Every project and every mix of tech and tools seems to be slightly different. I think the design methodology that we follow, research and insight, having a clear goal, I think that's pretty consistent. But I think in terms of a class to class or project to project basis, we have to actually be pretty flexible and open, but try to learn through the medium as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think I can. Okay, go ahead, Dean.
No. You go.
Okay, I was saying I think I can contribute in a part here. So like days ago, I met someone from Senegal. So like just for context, like Africa has around 54 countries, and Senegal is part of the Francophone Africa. So I met this guy from Senegal who he owns a construction company, but he uses like deep tech, like in a very creative way. So basically they use like public cameras to use like computer vision to analyze traffic, right? So basically now they can make more assertive recommendations in terms of how can we improve the roads, because they've analyzed like data regarding how many cars like go through that specific road in a specific time of day, like how many people goes around. So like they kind of became one of the first companies in Africa doing like very smart ways to analyze that data and provide like for civil engineering or construction companies this type of information. So like it comes back to what you said, Todd. There is nothing new like on these, because they're using like cameras that were available before, but the way they are mixing like different like materials to create a different type of insight, completely the way we use like technology and we see things. So now like the government of Senegal, like because they've managed to win a contract with the government, they don't use the same materials for the entire road, because they know that the road doesn't need the same materials everywhere. So now they can save and like use the better materials in different places. So it becomes kind of affordable and cost efficient, because they managed to find a creative way to use technology to solve a specific problem.
Yeah, it's a great example.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I think the theme that I think we're all sort of discussing here really is the backbone of it is remaining curious, and also looking broadly for inspiration, right? Some of the most interesting examples of innovation I've seen and heard are when very adjacent solutions somehow match up to solve new problems. There's the great story about mechanic that sort of was innovating and had tools for removing cylinders from cylinder heads and engines, and that thinking led to solving some birthing tools and helping assist newborns into the world in ways that were safer and for both the babies and the mothers, and those kinds of stories aren't just human stories, right? Animals are amazingly innovative in their use of tools and their adapting of new technologies. The crows and I forget exactly where, and I think it's in Korea and parts of Asia that have learned how to some of their favorite nuts are very hard to break open, and they used to fly high and drop them, and that got that only produced so many results. And so they learned that waiting at traffic lights, and when the light would turn red, they'd all scoot out and put their nuts under the tires of cars, and after the cars drove over them, then they'd be cracked open. Is a great sort of example of like, we aren't the only species that is able to innovate and learn new tools. And sort of wrapping that back to Todd, what you were talking about, I think it's always been critical to, with technology and learning and education, both for how we become better at using technology and understand it better, and how we apply it to the problems that we're solving as designers. It needs to be that cyclical nature of trying things, using tech on our own to solve problems in our own lives, and from that, learning about new ways that we might be able to use those technologies to provide better solutions to the design challenges that we're facing. And if you're not immersed in it, and you're not making, and you're not experimenting and asking questions and reading up across other industries and dabbling as much as you can with these technologies, and sort of in the post-COVID world, really importantly, traveling. The use of technology in certain parts of the world is so eye-opening, and in some cases, you are seeing leaps and bounds in places where you thought it was more emergent tech, but the way they're using tech is so innovative. Or you go to places, I used to always tell my team, you know, if we need to do a quick jump into the future, go to Japan and watch how they're using mobile technology. And that'll give you, it's like a quick time capsule, and other parts of Asia as well. So I think that immersion is critical. Be curious, learn new tools. I remember at ArtCenter, I had a vision for something I wanted to deliver. I didn't think there was a tool available to do that. And so that sent me off on a path to somehow learn what I needed to learn to fulfill that vision. It ended up leading me down to South Pasadena to a little company called COSA that was building a tool that you could use for motion graphics, because I needed some really cool motion graphics, and this was early days. There wasn't After Effects. Well, guess what? COSA was version 1 of After Effects. And I talked my way into their little office and said, look, I'm just a student, but I hear you're working on something that I need. Let's work together. And I learned, as they were producing the tool, some things that I could use and help share with them some thoughts and ideas that I had. And we ended up using that sort of a beta version of COSA After Effects to achieve some of our needs. So remaining curious, asking questions, learning new things, and then thinking about how those learnings can maybe be applied to problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I was thinking about, as everyone was talking, I think a reference or example that Tom and I give in our AI and Agent Studio comes from a reading. I can't remember the book now off the top of my head, but it talks about like the history of vacuuming or cleaning the floor, and it fundamentally, the introduction of new technology and tools, we're essentially kind of doing the same historic activity or goal or achieving it. We're just achieving it maybe a little bit differently. You know, are you actually sweeping the floor now, or now are you hitting a button and now, oh, you know, autonomous robot comes out and cleans your floor? It's still achieving the same goal. It's just your involvement and the actions involved change. So I really like that. And you can think about, I know, Ian, we talked about like, okay, a rock, you know, rock at one point was thought of as technology. And then we get to the hammer. They're both kind of effective at achieving the same goal, but the hammer, right, being a more effective or efficient way to crack something open, for example, or to hit it. So I really like that, of thinking about also technology and its evolution inevitably also evolves us, you know, as humans, and how we adapt and complete things in our lives.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that theme is really important too. Like the ultimate tech and the ultimate solutions sometimes are designing away the problem or the previous solution to the problem, right? Making things just disappear, right? Housework disappearing sounds like a pretty good one. We're still, I mean, I've been testing those different solutions. They can't seem to keep up with my dogs. So more room
Yeah.
for improvement. Yeah.
Will never go away. And I think also, Ian, you were touching on this, and I think everybody was at a certain point, was you were just sharing recently, like how you sort of started to construct a way of working with technology. And so I'm sort of curious about, when did everyone feel like you fundamentally sort of changed your practice and became more involved in thinking about technology within your own work?
Well, I'm happy to mention that. I guess it's just sort of building on the story I was just sharing. But for me, it came very, very early. I mean, it really was inspired by when I was at ArtCenter in the mid 90s, early to mid 90s. We obviously were using lots of great technology at the time to produce the outcomes, right? So we were using all the Adobe suite, and we had great Silicon Graphics Lab, and we were using Alias and Softimage and building 3D models and rendering things. And I was a product design major, so it got to sort of span the full spectrum. So we were learning how to use tools, and those tools in some cases were nascent still, or slow, right? You'd have to get in there and kind of commandeer all the machines you could to render your complex model and video solutions overnight. And so then you had to kind of think through, well, all right, how do I do this in a way that has fewer polygons, or how do I force myself to use the constraints of our tech in ways to still produce the right outcomes? And if nothing else, I think that helped create a mindset and an understanding of technology as a tool or an ingredient in the process, not the thing to sort of define the outcomes or drive them, but as something that you could use. In some cases, they worked well and they provided the right outcomes. In other cases, they became constraints that you had to be willing to discard and understand sort of, the failures of those technologies and how that experiment didn't pan out. But I think for me, at least, that ticked and tied with my passion for new things, emerging challenges produced hard, uncomfortable moments, and in those discomforts, that forced curiosity. It forced adaptation. It forced learning, and learning paired, at least I've found, with emerging solutions from other spaces like technology, really help you kind of look at problem first, solution as ultimate outcome. But tech is never, and I know ArtCenter doesn't do this, but you never want to go down like, all right, well, what can we do with AI? It's like, well, we can do anything with it, but what are we trying to do for people? What does the world need? What are the big problems we're trying to solve? And what are all the different instruments that we may be able to use? And tech is just one of them for me.
Okay, so I think I have a question for you, Ian. So how often, like, because I know you based on your presentations, you kind of like anticipate the future, right? Like with technology. So how often does what you anticipated matches with actually the reality? Does the reality actually catch up?
Yeah, it's a great it's a great question. And sort of the goal with looking ahead and doing envisioning work is to one of the primary goals for that for me, and I always remind either clients or teams that I've been forming or working with or leadership, is that it's primary goal from my perspective has always been to catalyze conversation. It should get us thinking, and it should be just as much about, hey, that looks like something hopeful, let's work towards that, or let's discuss why that isn't something that we want to be realizing. And what's interesting is that in some ways that work, and one of the reasons why I started that organization at Microsoft was we had a fundamental research, and still do. Microsoft research is fundamental research, so it's not driven by customer context needs. It's a more academic model of research, right? And so researchers are, of course, they're inspired by the world around them, but they're really not applying their research to customer challenges and problems. And then, so there's sort of this chasm between that kind of research and customer needs. And my goal was to sort of bridge that chasm, and partly to envision, to understand the tech and understand the world of possibilities, and then articulate possible solutions to real problems, industry challenges, or real business problems, or real people problems, and present them as what ifs. And many of those have actually those scenarios have come to life in really interesting ways, and some very sort of oddly the same as predicted, but I never have felt, or I think it's critical to understand it's not the attempt at a crystal ball, it's an attempt at starting conversation and getting possible solutions out there on the table early, because in some ways they've affected so many. There were several organizations and programs at Microsoft that sort of shifted gears and did further research based on some of those ideas and concepts, and actually built up different solutions to go sort of experiment, or even some of the partners I worked with, Samsung went and started experimenting much more with clear display solutions, and the idea of building displays that you could see through. And so it's sort of give and take, like we were talking about. We're learning about what's possible, articulating some possibilities that you could leverage with those technologies, and from those illustrations or those ideas being sort of put into a real format that we can wrap our heads around, they lead other folks within the supply chain to go back and relook at some of their research and experiment with technology in new ways. So that's sort of been the path I've seen with that work.
Yeah, can I jump in and tie, like, I want to tie it to ArtCenter real quick, because this is all great discussion, great questions, and it was making me think of the AI again. And we showed the AI and agent class stuff for us. I mean, it's a good class, but for a reason. Is AI is one of those things. It's a tech, it's a term. You read about it a lot. You see examples of what it could be in movies. And, you know, a few years ago here at ArtCenter, we were seeing in the program the work being done by students who are incredibly diligent at all of the kind of human-centered, find the needs, find the problem. You know, it's not about the tech, it's about designing for the human, you know, and that's the foundation of our curriculum. But with something like AI, we were seeing in our own class and student presentations that it was like magic. It became synonymous with magic. So you'd have students that were incredibly diligent about each and every button on a flow through a UI, and have done, you know, 50 interviews to decide on what feature is in there. And then you reach that point in the presentation, and it's like, and then the AI does a bunch of stuff, and then it's done. And our department chair, Maggie Hendry, who I think might be watching this, you could just see her, steam coming out of the ears or whatever, just like, oh my goodness, the designers just abdicated their responsibility. He just gave it up. And so, yeah, with the whole like making with Emergent Tech, it is like, you can't even imagine the actual possibilities or unintended consequences, negative sometimes, when a tech is turned loose in the world, unless we as designers, I think, at least have like a little bit of insight into what it's good at and what it's not good at, and like what it's really like to work with it. And so, yeah, that was the spirit behind the class, is to not have the big tech like AI or machine learning be something that's so abstract to students that they can't have an informed perspective as a designer around maybe where it could work or where it could be, there could be unintended consequences and the like. So yeah, that's a challenge from a curriculum standpoint, is like, what's the balance and how much time can we spend and how much making can we really do? But like keeping like one hand on the making and the learning from understanding how the technology works, I just think, we think it's really important to not lose that.
Yeah, I think that helps us and question our assumptions. So I think I think there's that tension or challenge of how much of our assumptions are so much informed by what we read and media and hype. And I think we know something because we keep reading about it. But the ability to do primary research, I think, is the importance of engaging with a particular technology. Is that the hope is, as artists and designers, right, we see the world fundamentally different. And so that is important for us to engage, because we will also view that technology different than how a business perhaps has viewed it, or how our computer scientist has framed it. So I think we get a chance to kind of view it and reprioritize its application for exactly as we're talking about, is the goal is towards, considering how it impacts or what are the implications in somebody's life. But I think that's definitely, like, I want to encourage students who are watching our panel to not necessarily, I know it's so intimidating, but it's really, really important to have that direct engagement, and to also not fall within that. I think another trope is sort of the it's too hard, or even it's, we can endlessly sort of critique the technology and say it will get better, but that's constant, it's evolving over years and years and years. But to really kind of find the nuances are huge opportunities, to develop a project from those details that you get a chance to observe with your own hands. And inevitably, right, it's going to inform how you communicate your work to your audience or your end user. And I think, based on time, I'd love to have a little bit of discussion as well around how we as creatives, how has technology informed how we communicate, our formal communication. I think that's another part that I think there's a huge opportunity for artists and designers to consider and think about, but maybe isn't necessarily discussed as much. I think we often, as you brought up, Ian, as well, is, we sort of take the tools, say like an Adobe, and we say, I know how to complete this within that tool set, but what is it to shift and really look and examine at, okay, what is the behavior of or process of training a machine, and what do I get as an output, and how that might inform what I make thus far, or like, oh, it's not quite accurate, it's a little gloopy. We talk about like AI generated imagery and how that might spur, a new aesthetic investigation. So I don't know if anybody's thought about that at all around the more formal implications of tech.
Okay, like I was trying to talk, but I wasn't mute. Like I think talking about formal implications of tech, I will comment on that, but like in a different direction, but also focus on the question that Perla asked on the chat. She asked, what is ArtCenter doing for people? So like in terms of like how technology should be informed, like we knew, like I'm pretty sure that few of you guys read that there are like AIs that couldn't identify like Black people, right? Because like AIs are mostly based on like training, right? Like they train multiple images, and because specific teams didn't have like Black people as a representation, so basically they didn't consider like people or people of colors, different colors. And like I think that is also a very important factor that we should consider into technologies when we start to create or when we start experimenting, because different experimentations might have different effects to different people. And like it's really important to have more representation on what we do, because sometimes I do believe that the team that ignored like Black people per se didn't do that intentionally, because sometimes you can only solve problems that you're seeing, and if you don't have the right context and you don't see like people in your environment, you just don't solve the problem because it's not something you're seeing. So like yeah, it's really important to have that in considerations, like multiple like ratios profiles when we start creating this type of technology. But also going through like I'm not sure about what ArtCenter is doing like regarding BIPOC people, but we do like the most important activity of what we are doing with the World Class Designer Initiative. So it's trying to empower like not BIPOC people per se, but Black African designers, because we know like from felt we kind of don't exist on the design arena, on the design space, and on the creative space itself, like overall. But we do know that we can have like a big contribution on the space. We just need opportunity. So like what myself and my team are trying to do is trying to give like the people that are underrepresented a bit of more space. And I think ArtCenter is doing this, like inviting someone like me from Africa, trying to bring a completely different perspective from other corner of the world. So I believe like we are giving like baby steps toward that direction through a more inclusive and diverse conversation.
Yeah, I mean, to get to just, I wanted to pick up on the point you mentioned about the AI training data, which is absolutely right on that. It's absolutely true that like facial recognition software was not identifying like African-American Black faces because it was trained on not a representative set of imagery. And so much technology comes out of the lab and gets deployed into the world without enough without enough human-centered perspective before turning it all loose. And I did want to just mention that the Jeepney project that quickly cited at the beginning, Georgia, who, as I mentioned, had actually worked at an autonomous vehicle startup and had hands-on exposure to the software and tools that they are trained on to recognize cars and humans, and people on bikes, and learn to autonomously drive. The Jeepney project was actually inspired very much by her direct experience working professionally in tech, and then realizing after studying the training data that trains cars to drive themselves, that if you turn that software loose in a place like the rural Philippines, it's not going to work very well because it hasn't been trained. It's been trained on, like driving around Pasadena. And so I do think in our own way, by getting deep into this as human-centered designers who try to identify human needs and try to solve problems. I mean, I think the design field itself brings a valuable perspective into the tech world. And I feel like anytime we get our hands on the tech and look under the hood, or whatever analogy you want to make, we're going to find ways to make an impact. And so anyway, I do believe in the value of design. And anyway, Gideon, I think your point was, I really agree with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know we're out of time, so Jenny, I'll let you wrap, but agree wholeheartedly with that. And I think just the thing to remember to both Gideon and Todd's points is that we as designers we are the ones that can and should always bring the people centricity, the human centricity, and help others broaden their thinking to understand the problem space is sometimes much larger, and give those that are too tech centric or too stuck in the possible solution the benefit of the doubt. They're prototyping. What they're casting about are possibilities. They're not necessarily solutions yet, and so we're here to help stretch people's imaginations further, to look at new ways to solve the problems, and to force others to go back and extend their thinking to be more human-centric and more holistic. So I think these are great questions to always ask ourselves at every level, both organizationally and with the clients that we work with and the problems we try and solve.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Gideon. Thank you so much, Todd, for sharing all of your points of view, and with all the students and those joining us outside of ArtCenter. I know we could keep going for much longer than our allotted time. I have now more questions. But I want to be conscious of time and let everyone go, but just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your insights with everybody.
And thank you, Jenny, for hosting and moderating, and thank you, Gideon and Todd and Ian, for participating. And this conversation is tied to so much of ArtCenter's future. So we will be continuing this, and it's in so many ways expanding across the college. So a lot of work to do, but absolutely a part of the future and the present. So we have a few more sessions scheduled for tomorrow and Friday. In particular, this conversation will very directly connect to the conversation tomorrow on crafting emergent technology, which will really address enterprise and service design and the push and pull between design and research and the use and implementation of technology in different ways. So really hope you all can join there. And once again, thanks so much. And we appreciate you immensely, Jenny, and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.